5 miles, Angel 6.
Roger, that's the only one I've got right there where the pointer is.
Welcome back to the DCS SITREP. I'm your host, Prickly Hedgehog. Thanks for tuning in again for another update on news and information about DCS World. And not a lot of news this last week because Eagle Dynamics admitted, well, we've got a lot of people away on vacation right now, so the newsletter was a little bit lightweight. Nonetheless, there was a couple of highlights worth discussion. One was the helmet update that they're working on for the FA-18C Hornet. And while this isn't a major development in any way, shape, or form, it's certainly one that I enjoy from the team in terms of immersion. And we're seeing this across the board actually with other third-party developers too. RAZBAM has done a lot of work on the F-15E pilot body. And I don't know if you've seen this yet, but if you have the pilot body in the aircraft displayed and you start pulling G, then you will see the G suit inflate under load. We've also seen things like the fingers working and manipulating the buttons and switches on the joystick. So some of this work is really, really cool and immersive. And even though it's a small thing in the grand scheme of things, I find it quite pleasing to see this kind of attention to detail because, again, it produces quite a lot of immersive enjoyment in the game. And I think, too, it's cool to see because we know there are other games out there. One of the games I'm really looking forward to is Starfield and the work that they're doing on, animations and movement of bodies and walking around and that kind of stuff. And we're seeing ED do quite a lot of work in that area. One area that I'm really excited to see further development in, haven't seen it yet in a practical guise or a true release guise, and that is maintenance crew walking around the aircraft, basically ground crew at least for ground-based aircraft. We see a little bit with the supercarrier, of course, and the animations that they've worked on there, which are pretty impressive. And I know that that is still a work in progress. They're still developing and trying to enhance those systems. We've talked about having some sort of plane captain walk you from one point to the next on the deck of the aircraft carrier. That is something that has been discussed, and I'd love to see something more akin to that for ground crew for, say, the F-15 and other aircraft that we have. And so it's exciting to see what we got a snippet of it a little while ago with the Not-So's video on the F-15E, where the crew chief gave them a little salute as the aircraft pulled out. That is a neat little detail, and I'd like to see something more on that. I'd also like to see more work in terms of voice acting and voice work for, say, the tanking. I saw a little video the other day, which it's been around for a while now, but there's a video of an F-15E being refueled, and you can hear the refueler calling in the distances, 50 feet, 40 feet, 30, 20, 10 as the aircraft comes up and plugs. And then there's this sort of silly banter between the tanker and the F-15E crew, which is a real giggle. I'd love to see some, not necessarily the banter, but certainly some of that immersive element being introduced as well. So there's a whole plethora of these, if you like, non-core improvements to the game, peripheral improvements that again can add to the immersion. So we'll see what happens in the future. I'm hoping that we see more of this as time goes on. We'll have to wait and see what evolves in the game. Now, speaking of evolution, we have as another part of the newsletter, a little plug again for the Gazelle from Polychop. This was a positive reinforcement of the work that the team are doing, and a lot of you were excited to see that Polychop is still up and running and willing to revamp an older module like this, which really was well out of date considering the work that has been done on the Me-24P Hind and the Apache and other helicopters as well. So the fact that Polychop are working on it, we know that they're still working on the Kiowa. We just don't have any dates yet for that Kiowa in terms of early access release or early purchase or anything like that. And in fairness, there's some pretty tight timelines going on right now. We're halfway through the year. We're still waiting for, of course, the F-15E to be released. We're still waiting for things like Magnitude 3's Corsair. I've had questions about the Tornado, the Typhoon, as I said, the Phantom 2. We have yet to see more information on the Chinook and where that's at. So there's a lot of projects being worked on. We have another map still in play with the Northern Territories map from top end Australia, at least, from Check 6 simulations. And I reached out to one of their developers recently just to say, hey, let me know. I'm certainly happy to showcase that map. In fact, one of the dev teams actually started calling me Map Boy from one of the other teams here, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. But it's an exciting time. It's a packed time with all of these projects, and I know that the baying public are really demanding information, and they want their modules released. But honestly, and in fairness, there's only so much time to fly and learn all of these things. It's taken me a long time just to get anywhere near comfortable flying the F-15E and just dropping dumb bombs right now. That's the level of complexity, and I haven't really got to grips with any of the targeting pods and the ground radar. So, be careful what you wish for because there's only so many hours in a day, and some of these modules that we're seeing are incredibly complex. So again, getting back to the Polychop situation, really cool to see a major overhaul of the flight model. Basically, it was written from scratch for the Gazelle, and they also redid the interior and exterior as I showcased recently. So that's a really cool thing to see. And I think one of the things that's really interesting too is that as new projects get worked on, we also see some of these older projects get revamped as the teams learn from the modules that they've produced, and then new work that they're doing on new modules. Stuff gets translated back and forth, and we're seeing that not only with the Gazelle, again, which bodes well, but also with Heatblur. The work that they're doing on the Phantom 2 is also having some bearing, I think, on the F-14 A and B, which they've talked about, as well as other projects that they have. So some really cool symbiosis going on there, and nothing is static. Everything is very fluid in this game, and that is one of the challenges for developers, not only for Eagle Dynamics, but also for third-party people trying to plug their modules in. Lastly, here we had for the newsletter a little bit of a plug for a PvE, Player versus Environment server, which was through the Inferno server. I haven't played on this server, but this is a cool way to get involved in multiplayer work here. So this is a challenging and immersive experience that they have set up here for fighting against the game's AI systems. Those systems, of course, are still a work in progress. If you've had any experience with this, let me know. I still see a niche, and I had a discussion recently with somebody else. I still see a niche for a safe place for people to learn in a multiplayer environment. And I'm sure that there are servers out there, but they don't get plugged necessarily, and not a lot of people know about them apart from the people that are maybe directly involved with them. So if you have a server out there, or if you know of one which is a good, safe place for people to kind of dip their toes into the multiplayer environment, let me know, because there are some hostile environments out there, and sometimes not knowing what to do can be a real hindrance to positive experiences. And I think that's why the majority of our players are in fact solo players, because it's a safe place to be. Lastly here, and this isn't covered in the newsletter, but I was contacted by the RAZBAM Devs for the Sth Atlantic Map, which is undergoing major improvements right now. And somebody asked me a little bit about this, or made a comment about this map as a criticism, and I said stay tuned because I know something that you don't. And this is one of the advantages of being and disadvantages at the same time as being an influencer, where you have contact with the developers. Sometimes you know stuff but you can't say anything, and you sort of have to watch people say the darndest and sometimes the stupidest things. critiquing what's going on without any factual basis for it, and it's really frustrating as an influencer, if you like, or as somebody who has a small content creation channel. There's a lot of people that talk out of their assholes. I'm not gonna lie about what they think is going on in a developer's studio, and some of the comments that they make are completely unfactual, and yet they will use that as a vehicle to bitterly complain and critique and lash a developer where there's no factual basis for it whatsoever. So that can be really challenging. But the good news is the Sth Atlantic Map, in short, is seeing some major improvements. Now, I've always believed in this map. I love the scale of it. I love the beauty of it. I love the environment. But I think, in fairness to the two guys that have been working on this for well over 4 years now, it was probably a project that was a little too ambitious based on the technology that was available to the developers at that time. The good news is it's an evolving game. And as I said before, projects that get worked on and then completed, and then new projects get started, or there's time for reflection and learning has occurred, then there's an opportunity to go back, just like what we saw with Heatblur and the F-14, and in particular the Polychop Gazelle. Teams have the opportunity to go back and revamp things, and that's kind of what's happened here. To a greater or lesser degree, that the devs here have had time to do some things that they weren't able to do before, based on some learning experiences. And as I said, this was always an ambitious project, and like I said, I think perhaps too ambitious given the scale of the project. Now, initially it was released with only a few airfields on the mainland. That has been increased significantly, exponentially actually, over the last year or so since its release. So the project is not dead in any way, shape or form. It is still evolving, and like I said, we've got some really cool things coming there. But that scale, I think, people were expecting really high resolution mountains and really high resolution towns and a fully fleshed out mainland. And to be honest, I don't think we see this with some of the other maps too, that to have the true full fidelity experiences with the map, I don't think the technology can support it, and I don't think most of the public will actually accept having to download maybe double, triple, or even quadruple the amount of data needed to have that kind of detailed resolution in areas particularly where oftentimes you're not really even flying over them. Large areas of desert, large area of sort of forest, etc., etc. And I think this is one of the impediments to a Southeast Asia map that a lot of people are looking for. They want a Vietnam map, we want a Korea map, and I can't think of, maybe outside of portions of Microsoft Flight Simulator where you've paid for some extra upgrades, I can't think of any flight simulator that's doing that level of high fidelity and detail in any other game that I can think of off the top of my head, where people are asking for that high level of like I said, detail and a map of scale. So yeah, I'm excited for what the team are doing here. Hopefully you're looking at some great pictures of the work that they have done. Expect continued improvements, and expect also improvements to the DCS core engine, which is allowing us higher frame rates and general improvements to our flying experiences, which in a lot of cases, most people aren't looking at the ground when they're looking at their screens trying to get a BVR shot or even a BFM engagement. At that point, the only thing you care about is hitting the ground. So looking at the trees and looking at all the buildings, etc., etc., some of this criticism is a little bit of a joke, unless of course you're just there for the cinematic experience. And DCS, I think, offers a pretty decent experience of that. But there are limitations to the technology, and I think one of the biggest impediments too is that there are a lot of players out there that are have unrealistic expectations based on the technology that they are playing the game with and interacting with. If you're running on an old laptop, for example, if you're running on a really low-end PC, then you're not going to get the benefit of the eye candy that is available in the game. And there are limitations too, as far as I'm aware, on just how much detail can be put into the game. Again, as I said before, to limit the amount of data that these map makers can actually put in, without the whole thing slowing to a crawl, and without the file sizes being too big. As it is, I have players complaining about file sizes. Yet another map, I don't have enough space, ED needs to, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and so it goes on. Okay, some people have monitored or limited bandwidth that they can download things. I totally understand that. That's your problem, not the developer's problem. And so I understand the frustration, but it's also, you can't have your cake and eat it too, so to speak. You can't say, well, hey, my particular situation is I'm running an old laptop and I only have so many megabytes a day that I can download because of a metered connection. The developers need to be aware of that. And it's not that they aren't aware of that, but you can't complain to them and then say, well, this map sucks, right? Because I'm running it on a shitty old laptop or a crappy old PC, and my bandwidth is limited, and so I can't download all the high fidelity that I want to. So yeah, you gotta take some responsibility for it. And I know Juice from the Air Warfare Group and I have had this discussion. Juice has gone out on a limb and actually produced some videos on this very topic, where people complain and bemoan high fidelity issues and detail issues, etc., which is no fault of certainly the third-party developers on occasion. All right, so long and short is, yes, I'm loving what they have done with the Sth Atlantic Map here, so stay tuned. This should be coming in a future update here, so stay tuned for that, and I hope you enjoy the images that you've seen. All right, well, that'll do for this week's SITREP. This has been Prickly Hedgehog. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more news and information as it comes to hand, and we'll see you next time on the DCS SITREP. See ya!